"Can you stand by the bathroom wall so you don't ruin the wedding photos with your age?" said my new daughter-in-law, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she adjusted her veil. I smiled, picked up my elegantly wrapped gift from the table, and walked straight out of that reception hall. When they discovered what was inside that box, the phone calls started coming at 3 in the morning and haven't stopped since. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, before you start thinking I'm just another bitter mother-in-law, let me back up and tell you how we got here. Because what happened that day wasn't just about a rude comment or hurt feelings. It was about 36 years of raising a son who apparently learned that treating people like garbage was acceptable, especially when that person was me. I'm Martha Williams, and at 64, I thought I'd seen the worst of what family could dish out. I was wrong. The wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of David's life. My son, my only child, marrying Brittany Peterson, a marketing executive with perfectly white teeth and an even more perfectly calculated smile. I'd spent months helping plan this event, writing checks for flowers, catering, and photography while living on soup and crackers to make my Social Security stretch. But standing there in my modest dress, the nicest thing I owned, listening to Brittany explain how my 64-year-old appearance would somehow taint their precious photographs, something inside me finally snapped. Not the crying, begging, pleading kind of snap, the quiet, dangerous kind. You see, 3 weeks earlier, my entire world had changed in ways no one knew about. But we'll get to that. The wedding guests barely looked up as I walked past their tables, my gift box clutched firmly in my hands. A few neighbors from David's childhood waved, but most were Brittany's crowd, young professionals with their smartphones already out, posting photos of the gorgeous couple to social media. David was at the head table, laughing at something his best man was saying. He didn't even notice his mother leaving his wedding, didn't see the tears I refused to let fall or the way my hands shook as I pushed open those heavy reception hall doors. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just a few late guests hurrying inside. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air, listening to the muffled sound of celebration behind me. 36 years of sacrifices, of putting my son first, of believing that unconditional love would eventually be returned. I was done believing fairy tales. The taxi ride home took 15 minutes. 15 minutes to realize that walking away from that wedding wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Because inside that gift box wasn't just a wedding present. It was proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even. And trust me, what I'd wrapped up in that pretty white paper with the silver bow would change everything. 3 weeks before the wedding, I was standing in Murphy's Corner Market at 9:30 at night, counting out exact change for a can of soup and a package of saltines. $23.47. That's what I had left until my next Social Security check, and David's wedding was in less than a month. I'd already spent my small savings on my wedding outfit and a gift I couldn't really afford. A set of crystal wine glasses I'd seen Brittany admire online. The kind of thing a mother does because she wants her son's wife to be happy, even when that same wife makes snide comments about older people's fashion choices. The store was nearly empty, just me and Tommy Murphy behind the counter. Same kid who'd bagged groceries here since high school. "Evening, Mrs. Williams," he said with that tired smile of someone working a double shift. "Lottery machine's working tonight if you're interested. Jackpot's up to $62 million. $62 million. I almost laughed. Here I was, rationing soup cans, and he was talking about numbers so large they didn't seem real. But something made me pause. Maybe it was the memory of last week's family dinner, when Brittany had shown off her new designer handbag, the third one this month, while I quietly ate the cheapest thing on the menu. Maybe it was David's casual comment about how I should start thinking about downsizing my already tiny apartment because older people don't need much space. Or maybe it was just pure, stubborn defiance. "I'll take one ticket," I heard myself say. "Quick pick." Tommy looked surprised. In the 5 years since Harold died, I'd never bought so much as a scratch-off ticket, but he fed a $5 bill into the machine, and it hummed to life, printing out a small slip of paper with 6 numbers that would either be meaningless or life-changing. 7, 14, 21, 35 to 47, Powerball 9. I folded it carefully, and slipped it into my purse, right next to the grocery receipt that showed exactly how little I had left. $23.47 minus $5. $18.47 to last until next Friday. Harold would have called me foolish. Martha, I could hear his voice. Gambling is for people who can afford to lose money. But Harold had been gone for 4 years, and clearly, I'd already lost everything that mattered anyway. The walk home took 45 minutes because I couldn't afford the bus. 45 minutes of replaying every dismissive comment. Every time I'd been made to feel like a burden instead of a mother. By the time I climbed the 3 flights to my studio apartment, I'd made a decision that had nothing to do with lottery tickets. Win or lose, I was done being their convenient source of guilt money and inconvenient reminder of family obligation. The lottery drawing was Saturday night. I watched it the same way I watched everything else. Alone, with a cup of tea and the volume turned low so I wouldn't disturb my neighbors. When the numbers appeared on screen, I didn't believe them at first. 7 to 14, 21, 35 to 47, Powerball 9. Every single number on my crumpled $5 ticket. $62 million. I sat there for 10 minutes, checking and rechecking, waiting for the mistake to reveal itself. But there was no mistake. I, Martha Williams, woman who ate soup for dinner and walked everywhere to save bus fare, had just won more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. The smart thing would have been to call David immediately to share the incredible news with my only family. But I didn't pick up the phone. Instead, I carefully placed the ticket in my jewelry box, next to Harold's wedding ring and my mother's pearls. Because suddenly I had a very different kind of wedding present in mind. The lottery office in downtown Springfield looked nothing like I'd imagined. I'd expected something grand, official, maybe even celebratory. Instead, it was a sterile government building with fluorescent lighting and the kind of beige walls that suggested bureaucracy, not life-changing fortunes. "Congratulations, Mrs. Williams," said Janet Patterson, the claims officer, a pleasant woman in her 40s who handled my paperwork with the same efficiency she'd probably use for a parking permit. "After taxes, your lump sum comes to $38.4 million. $38 million? $400,000. Even reduced by taxes, the number was still impossible to comprehend. I signed documents, provided identification, and listened to explanations about direct deposit and financial planning services. Janet was patient, professional, and completely unaware that she was processing the claim of a woman who'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner just a week ago. "Now," she said, sliding a business card across the desk, "I strongly recommend speaking with a financial advisor before making any major purchases or decisions. This amount of money can be overwhelming, and we see people make choices they later regret." I nodded politely, but my mind was already made up. I'd had 4 sleepless nights to plan exactly how I wanted to handle this windfall, and overwhelming wasn't the word I'd use. Liberating was more accurate. My first stop was Westfield Financial, where I opened accounts and arranged for electronic transfers. My second stop was Henderson Real Estate, where I'd spotted a "for sale" sign that had caught my attention during my long walks around town. The oceanfront property on Lighthouse Drive? Beverly Henderson raised her eyebrows when I mentioned my interest. "Mrs. Williams, that's a very expensive piece of real estate. The asking price is $2.8 million. I'd like to see it today, if possible." Beverly's demeanor shifted when I mentioned I was a cash buyer. Suddenly, the showing was immediately available, and her assistant could drive us out to the coast right away. The house was everything I'd dreamed of during those years of penny pinching. A sprawling contemporary home with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and a wraparound deck where you could watch the sunrise over the water. It had been on the market for 8 months, Beverly explained, because most buyers needed financing, and the sellers were motivated. "I'll take it," I said, standing on that deck, listening to the waves crash below. "Full asking price." Beverly blinked. "Don't you want to have it inspected? Get an appraisal? Look at comparable sales in the area?" "No need. I want to close as soon as possible." While Beverly handled the paperwork for what she kept calling the fastest sale in company history, I made 3 more stops. First, to Johnson Toyota, where I bought a reliable, sensible Camry. Nothing flashy, just dependable transportation. Then to Miller's Furniture, where I arranged for the basic necessities to be delivered to my current apartment and to the beach house once it was ready. Finally, I went to Pinnacle Bank, where I had them prepare a cashier's check for $3 million, payable to David and Brittany Williams. "This is quite a large amount," the bank manager said, triple-checking my account balance. "Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely certain." The wedding was still 2 weeks away, but my preparations were complete. David and Brittany thought they were getting crystal wine glasses from their financially struggling mother-in-law. Instead, they were getting the keys to their dream life, literally. The deed to the beach house and the check would be wrapped in that pretty white box, my wedding gift that would make their mortgage. Their financial struggles, everything they'd ever worried about, completely irrelevant. I'd spend those 2 weeks fantasizing about their faces when they opened it, about David's shock, Brittany's speechless surprise, about finally being seen as a blessing instead of a burden. I should have known better than to expect gratitude from people who'd never learned to be grateful. The morning of David's wedding, I woke up in my studio apartment with a mix of excitement and nervousness I hadn't felt in years. Today was the day I would transform from the struggling mother-in-law who pinched pennies to the generous benefactor who solved all their problems with one incredible gift. I'd rehearsed this moment for 2 weeks, imagining the joy on their faces, the tears of gratitude, maybe even an apology from Brittany for some of her sharper comments about my limited financial situation. The beach house deed and $3 million check were beautifully wrapped in white paper with silver ribbon, sitting on my kitchen counter like a promise of better family relationships to come. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, followed by a reception at the Riverside Country Club. I'd splurged on a taxi both ways. No more showing up to important events with wind-blown hair from walking or smelling like bus exhaust. David looked handsome in his tuxedo, standing at the altar with the kind of confident smile that reminded me of his father. Brittany was radiant in her designer gown, the one that cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the past 3 years combined. As I watched them exchange vows, I felt that familiar surge of maternal pride mixed with hopeful anticipation. This gift would change everything between us. The reception started beautifully. The country club was decorated with white roses and gold accents, live music, and waiters circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I found my assigned table, number 12, toward the back, with David's elderly great-aunt and a few family friends I barely knew. "Martha, you look lovely," said Mrs. Peterson, Brittany's grandmother, leaning over from the next table. "That's a beautiful dress." It was beautiful, the nicest thing I'd owned since Harold's funeral. Navy blue with subtle beading, purchased specifically for this day when I'd finally present my life-changing gift. I'd even splurged on new shoes and had my hair done professionally. The first few hours passed pleasantly enough. Dinner was served, toasts were made, and I watched my son dance with his new wife, both of them glowing with happiness. I kept glancing at the gift table, where my white box sat among dozens of others, waiting for the moment when they'd open presents and discover what their struggling mother-in-law had actually given them. That's when Brittany approached my table. She looked stunning, having changed from her ceremony gown into a sleek reception dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile was picture-perfect as she bent down to speak to me. "Martha, could I ask you a tiny favor?" "Of course, dear. Anything for you on your special day. The photographer wants to take some family photos by the main entrance, and the lighting there is just perfect. But the thing is," she paused, her smile never wavering, "could you stand by the bathroom wall instead? I mean, with your age and everything, we're trying to keep the photos looking young and fresh for social media. You understand, right?" The words hit me like ice water. Around the table, conversation stopped. Mrs. Peterson's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Great Aunt Helen actually gasped. But Brittany's smile remained perfectly in place, as if she just asked me to pass the salt instead of essentially calling me too old and ugly for her precious photographs. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. I stood up, walked to the gift table, and picked up my white box with its silver ribbon. Then I walked past the shocked faces, past the photographer setting up by the entrance, past my son who was adjusting his tie and completely oblivious to what had just happened. I walked out of that reception hall carrying the keys to their dream house and $3 million in cash. And for the first time in years, I felt absolutely powerful. The taxi driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror during the 15-minute ride back to my apartment. I suppose it wasn't every day he picked up a wedding guest, carrying a gift box, and leaving before the cake was cut. "Everything okay, ma'am?" he asked as we pulled up to my building. "You sure you don't want to go back?" "I'm exactly where I need to be," I told him, and meant it. Back in my studio apartment, I sat in Harold's old chair, the one piece of furniture I'd kept when I'd had to sell the house, and placed the unopened gift box on my coffee table. Inside were the deed to a $2.8 million oceanfront home and a check for $3 million. Outside that box was a daughter-in-law who thought I was too old and decrepit to appear in her wedding photos. The irony was almost funny. Almost. I made myself a cup of tea and waited. It was 8:30 when my phone first rang. "Mom?" David's voice sounded strained, confused. "Brittany said you left early. Are you feeling okay? Did something happen?" "I'm feeling better than I have in years, actually. But you missed the cake cutting, the bouquet toss, all of it. People were asking where you went." I sipped my tea, looking at that white box. I'm sure they were. "Mom, what's going on? You're being weird." Weird. 36 years of raising him, 4 years of being their emergency bank account and expressing the slightest independence made me weird. "David, did your wife explain why I left?" There was a pause. "She said you seemed upset about something, but she didn't know what. She feels terrible, Mom. She's worried she did something wrong. She feels terrible. She's worried. But apparently, she hadn't mentioned the part about banishing me to the bathroom wall so I wouldn't contaminate their photographs with my advanced age of 64. Tell Brittany not to worry. I'm sure she'll understand everything soon enough." "What does that mean?" "It means you should go enjoy your honeymoon, David. Congratulations on your marriage." I hung up before he could respond. The phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time it was Brittany, her voice honey-sweet with artificial concern. "Martha, I'm so sorry if I did something to upset you tonight. You know how crazy wedding days are. Everything happens so fast, and I just hate to think—" "Brittany," I interrupted gently, "did you ask me to stand by the bathroom wall so I wouldn't ruin your photos with my age?" Silence. Then, I was trying to arrange the family photos, and I thought, "You thought I was too old and unattractive to be included in your family pictures. That's not— I was just trying to organize things, and the photographer said—" "The photographer told you to hide the elderly relatives?" Another pause. "Martha, you're taking this completely wrong. I was trying to be helpful, to make sure everyone looked their best. I looked my best tonight, Brittany. I spent money I couldn't afford on a dress, shoes, and professional hairstyling so I'd be presentable for your special day. Apparently my best wasn't good enough." "Martha, please don't be so sensitive. It was just about the composition of the photos, not about you personally." Sensitive. There it was. The word that had followed me through 4 years of widowhood, every time I'd expressed hurt or disappointment at their treatment. Too sensitive when they forgot to invite me to David's birthday dinner. Too sensitive when they canceled Christmas plans at the last minute. Too sensitive when Brittany made comments about people on fixed incomes needing to adjust their expectations. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "I am being too sensitive. Thank you for the reminder. So you understand? And you'll come to the gift opening tomorrow? We're doing it at our place around noon." The gift opening, where they'd unwrap their crystal wine glasses and probably make some polite comment about how thoughtful I was before moving on to more expensive presents from other relatives. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. Because I wouldn't. I had 38 million reasons to be there. Sunday afternoon, I stood outside David and Brittany's rental house holding a different gift, a small box containing a key and a folded piece of paper. The original white box with the deed and check was safely locked in my bedroom closet, where it would stay until I decided what to do with it. The house was full of wedding guests who'd stayed over for the gift opening tradition. Brittany's parents, her sister and brother-in-law, a few close friends, and several relatives I barely knew. Everyone was in a festive mood, still buzzing from the previous night's celebration. "Martha!" Brittany rushed over as I entered, her smile brilliant and completely convincing. "I'm so glad you made it, and I hope you know how sorry I am about any misunderstanding yesterday. Wedding stress, you know how it is." "Of course, dear. Think nothing of it." We settled into the living room, where gift boxes and bags covered every surface. David and Brittany took turns opening presents, while someone kept a list for thank you notes. Expensive kitchen appliances, crystal stemware, artwork, luggage, the kinds of things young professional couples received from their well-off families and friends. My original gift, the crystal wine glasses, was received with appropriate enthusiasm. Brittany held them up to the light, praising their quality, while David nodded approvingly. "Thanks, Mom. These are beautiful." They were beautiful, and they'd cost me nearly 2 weeks' worth of grocery money. "Actually," I said, standing up, "I have one more gift for you both." I handed over the small box I'd prepared that morning. David looked surprised. It wasn't like me to bring multiple gifts, given my limited budget, but he opened it eagerly. Inside was a single key attached to a keychain and a folded piece of paper. David held up the key, looking puzzled. "What's this to, Mom?" I cleared my throat. "It's the key to my new apartment. The address is on the paper." The room fell silent. David unfolded the paper and read it, his confusion deepening. "Ocean View Towers, Unit 4B. Mom, that's the expensive high-rise downtown. How did you—" "I used some life insurance money Harold left me. Money I'd been saving for an emergency. Not technically a lie. Winning the lottery definitely qualified as an emergency of sorts. I realized after yesterday that I needed to start thinking about my own future, my own living situation." Brittany's smile was looking strained. "That's wonderful, Martha. But why are you giving us the key?" "Because I want you to see it before I move in next week. It's a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor, ocean views, modern kitchen, in-unit laundry. I thought you might like to visit sometime." The implications hung in the air. David's expression was shifting from confusion to something that might have been concern, or possibly calculation. "Mom, how much did this cost?" "More than I probably should have spent, but I'm tired of living paycheck to paycheck. I decided I deserved something nice for my golden years." Brittany's sister, Kelly, was the first to break the uncomfortable silence. "Good for you, Martha. It sounds lovely." But David and Brittany weren't looking at Kelly. They were looking at each other with an expression I recognized from 4 years of being their personal ATM. The look that said they were rapidly calculating what this meant for their own financial expectations. "So, you used all of Dad's life insurance?" David asked carefully. "A significant portion of it, yes. What I didn't mention was the other apartment key in my purse, the one to the beach house that should have been theirs, the one that came with a $3 million check and a mother-in-law who'd been willing to give them everything. Instead, they'd get crystal wine glasses and the knowledge that their emergency bank account had just closed permanently." "Well," Brittany said, her voice a little too bright, "I think that's just great. Really, independence is so important." I smiled and settled back into my chair to watch them open the rest of their gifts. Because the best was yet to come. Moving day arrived with professional movers, expensive furniture, and my son standing in my new apartment lobby looking like he'd seen a ghost. I hadn't expected him to show up, but there he was at 8 in the morning, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Mom, we need to talk." Ocean View Towers was everything I'd told them it would be. Luxury high-rise living with concierge service, a fitness center, and apartments that cost more per month than most people's annual salaries. My 4th-floor unit had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, granite countertops, and enough space for the life I'd always wanted but never thought I could afford. "Nice place," David said, looking around as movers carried in furniture that clearly hadn't come from my old studio apartment. "Really nice. Expensive nice." I accepted the coffee, a peace offering, apparently, and watched him process the transformation. Gone was the struggling widow counting pennies for soup cans. In her place was a woman who could afford designer furniture and harbor views. "I told you I used your father's life insurance money." "All of it?" "A good portion of it, yes." David walked to the windows, staring out at the water. "Mom, Brittany and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. This seems really impulsive. Moving to an expensive place, spending money you've been so careful with for years. Are you sure you thought this through?" Worried about me? That was rich, coming from someone who hadn't called to check if I'd made it home safely after walking out of his wedding. I've never been more sure of anything. "But what about your future? What if you have medical expenses, or need care, or— David, I set down my coffee cup. Are you concerned about my well-being, or are you concerned about what this means for your inheritance? His face flushed. That's not fair. Mom, I'm trying to look out for you. The same way you looked out for me at your wedding? That stopped him cold. For a moment, neither of us spoke while movers arranged my new sofa. Real leather, the kind I'd admired in showrooms but never dreamed of owning. Brittany feels terrible about that misunderstanding, he said finally. I'm sure she does. She really does, Mom. She's been upset all week, worried that you hate her. I almost laughed. Brittany was upset all right, but probably not for the reasons David thought. More likely, she was calculating how much money had just slipped through their fingers. I don't hate Brittany, hate David, but I also don't intend to spend my remaining years making myself smaller so other people feel more comfortable. He studied my face, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. Then it was gone, replaced by the calculating adult who'd learned that his mother was an ATM, not a person. So what happens now? Now I live my life the way I choose to live it. And us, our relationship? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally for 36 years, and felt something shift inside me. Not love dying, but expectations finally being buried. That depends entirely on whether you want a relationship with me or just access to whatever money you think I have left. The silence stretched between us while movers arranged furniture, and my new life took shape around us. Finally, David picked up his coffee cup. I should go, let you get settled. After he left, I stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at a view that cost more per month than I'd previously spent per year, and felt absolutely no guilt whatsoever, because this was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, Brittany showed up at my door with homemade cookies and an apology that sounded like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. I let her in, offered coffee, and watched her eyes catalog every expensive detail of my new apartment. Martha, I owe you a huge apology for my behavior at the wedding. I was so stressed, and I said things that came out completely wrong. The last thing I ever wanted was to hurt you. She was good. I'll give her that. The right amount of regret in her voice, tears that looked genuine, body language that screamed remorse. If I hadn't spent 4 years watching her manipulate my son, I might have been convinced. Apology accepted, dear. Really? Her relief seemed genuine. I've been sick about it. Martha, absolutely sick. David said you thought I was calling you old or ugly, and I swear that's not what I meant at all. What did you mean? She set down her coffee cup and leaned forward, the picture of earnest sincerity. I was trying to arrange people by height for the photos. You know how photographers are about composition. I thought if the shorter people stood in one area and the taller people in another, by the bathroom wall. Well, yes, but only because the lighting was better there. Not because of your age or anything like that. I would never— I held up a hand. Brittany, you don't need to explain. What's done is done. But she wasn't finished. This was clearly a prepared speech, and she was determined to deliver every word. The thing is, Martha, I realize my words might have sounded hurtful, even though that wasn't my intention. And I want you to know that I consider you family now. Real family. Which is why David and I have been talking. And we'd love to have you over for dinner this weekend. Just the 3 of us, so we can really talk and clear the air. Dinner, at their house, where they could pump me for information about my sudden financial upgrade without witnesses. That's very thoughtful. Saturday night? I'll make that pot roast you complimented at Easter. I'd complimented it because I was trying to be polite, not because it was actually good. Brittany's cooking skills were as artificial as her apologies. I'm afraid I have plans Saturday night. Oh. She looked disappointed. What about Sunday then? I'm busy Sunday as well. Next weekend? Brittany, I appreciate the invitation, but I'm finding that my calendar is quite full these days. That wasn't entirely true. I spent my evenings reading, walking on the harbor promenade, or sitting on my balcony watching boats come and go. But for the first time in years, my solitude felt like choice rather than abandonment. Full with what? The question slipped out before she could stop it, revealing the real reason for this visit. She wanted to know what I was doing, where I was going, who I was spending time with, And most importantly, who else might have access to whatever money I'd mysteriously acquired? Various things. I'm exploring my options. What kind of options? I smiled and stood up, the universal signal that a visit was over. Thank you for the cookies, Brittany. They're delicious. She gathered her purse, clearly frustrated that her fishing expedition hadn't yielded any useful information. At the door, she turned back with one more attempt. Martha, you know David loves you so much. He's worried that this rift between us is hurting your relationship with him. There's no rift. Brittany, there's just clarity. After she left, I ate one of her cookies, store-bought, despite her claims of homemade, and watched the harbor lights twinkle in the distance. 24 days until they'd realize exactly how much clarity I'd gained, because the beach house closing was scheduled for next month. And when it did, everything would become crystal clear. The private investigator's report arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to my apartment. I'd hired Rebecca Chen the week after Brittany's visit, partly out of curiosity and partly out of self-preservation. If they were digging into my finances, I wanted to know what they might find. The report was thorough and enlightening. David and Brittany had indeed hired their own investigator to trace my sudden wealth. They'd discovered the new apartment, the car purchase, and the furniture upgrades. What they hadn't discovered was the lottery ticket or the beach house purchase. More interesting were the financial details Rebecca had uncovered about their own situation. Despite David's recent promotion and their comfortable lifestyle, they were living paycheck to paycheck. Credit card debt, student loans, and a mortgage that consumed nearly half of David's income. They'd been counting on my eventual death to solve their financial problems. The phone calls had started 3 days ago, subtle at first. Mom, I was wondering if you'd looked into long-term care insurance. At your age, it's probably getting expensive. Have you updated your will recently? With the apartment and everything, you should probably review your beneficiaries. Brittany mentioned that her grandmother had a great financial advisor who specializes in retirement planning for seniors. Maybe you should talk to someone professional about managing your assets. Assets? Beneficiaries? Long-term care insurance? They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. This morning's call was David again, his voice carrying that forced casualness I'd learned to recognize over the years. Mom, I hate to bring this up, but our investigator friend mentioned that someone might have won the lottery recently. Someone local. Isn't that crazy? Can you imagine suddenly having all that money? My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. Investigator friend? Oh, you know, Jake Morrison from high school. He's a private investigator now. We were just talking, and he mentioned this lottery thing. Weird coincidence, right? They knew. Maybe not everything, but they knew enough to be asking the right questions. Very weird, I agreed. The thing is, if someone did win that much money, they'd probably want to be careful about who they told. You know how people can get when there's that much cash involved. Friends, family, everyone suddenly needs help with something. The irony was breathtaking. My own son was warning me about family members who might take advantage of lottery winners. That's very wise advice, David. So, hypothetically, if you knew someone who'd come into money suddenly, you'd tell them to be really careful about who they trust, right? Absolutely. I'd tell them to be especially careful about family members who'd already shown they view them as a source of money rather than a person worthy of respect. Silence on the other end of the line. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that if someone won the lottery, they'd probably want to make sure their gifts went to people who appreciated them for reasons beyond their bank account balance. Are you... Mom? Did you win the lottery? I looked out my harbor view windows at the life I'd bought with my winnings. Then, at the beach house deed sitting in my desk drawer, the deed that should have been their wedding present. I think this conversation has gone on long enough, David. Mom, wait. I hung up and turned off my phone, because tomorrow was the day I'd been waiting for. Tomorrow, the beach house purchase would be finalized. The $3 million check would be deposited, and my preparations would be complete. Tomorrow, I'd give them exactly what they deserved. The beach house was everything I'd dreamed of, and more. Standing on the wraparound deck at sunrise, watching dolphins play in the waves beyond my private beach, I understood why people said money couldn't buy happiness. It couldn't, but it could buy freedom from people who made you unhappy. I'd been living here for a week, having quietly moved my most important possessions while keeping the downtown apartment as a decoy, Let David and Brittany drive by Ocean View Towers, looking for signs of my daily routine. Let them wonder how often I was home, who I was seeing, what I was planning. My phone had been buzzing constantly since our last conversation. Calls, texts, voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as they realized I wasn't answering. Finally, yesterday, Brittany had shown up at the downtown apartment. According to the doorman, who'd been well compensated for his discretion, she'd waited in the lobby for 3 hours. This morning, she tried a different approach. The text message was a masterpiece of manipulation. "Martha, David is in the hospital. Please call immediately." I called the hospital directly. No David Williams admitted. No emergency room visits. Nothing. So I called her back. "Martha, thank God. David collapsed at work and they rushed him to Springfield General. Can you meet us there?" "Brittany, I just called Springfield General. David isn't there." Silence. Then, "Well, maybe they transferred him. Or maybe I misheard the name of the hospital in all the confusion." "David isn't in any hospital, Brittany." More silence. "We need to talk, Martha. Face to face. There are things you don't understand." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that you winning the lottery affects more people than just you." There it was. The mask finally slipping completely off. "How does my winning the lottery affect you, Brittany?" "Because we're family. Because we've been counting on you, planning around you being part of our financial future. Because David is your only son, and you can't just cut us out because of one stupid comment I made at our wedding." One stupid comment. Yes, one comment that I've apologized for 100 times, and you're acting like I committed some unforgivable sin. It's not fair, Martha. It's not fair to punish us forever because I misspoke one time when I was stressed. I walked to my beach view windows, watching waves crash against rocks that belong to me now. You're right, Brittany. It's not fair to punish you for one comment. Thank you. I knew you'd... Which is why I'm not punishing you for the comment. Then what? I'm punishing you for thinking that comment would work, for believing you could humiliate me publicly and then manipulate me privately, for 4 years of treating me like an ATM with legs, for raising my son to believe that his mother exists to solve his financial problems. Martha, that's not... For assuming that blood relation gives you the right to my money, but not the obligation to treat me with basic human decency. Her voice turned cold. Calculating. You know what, Martha? Maybe you're right. Maybe we did take you for granted. But you need us more than we need you. You're a 64-year-old woman with no friends, no life, no family except us. What are you going to do with all that money? Sit alone in your fancy apartment until you die? I smiled, looking out at my private beach, my infinity pool, my 3-bedroom house that should have been their wedding present. Actually, Brittany, I have plans for the money. Big plans. Plans that were going to include you and David right up until you asked me to stand by the bathroom wall. What kind of plans? The kind that would have made you very, very happy. But now you'll never know, will you? I hung up and turned off my phone again. Tomorrow I'd turn it back on. Tomorrow I'd let them discover what they'd actually lost. But tonight I was going to sit on my deck, drink wine that cost more than their monthly mortgage payment, and watch the sunset over the ocean that belonged to me. The final call came on Saturday morning at exactly 9 a.m. I let it ring 4 times before answering, long enough to savor the moment I'd been anticipating for 6 weeks. Mom, David's voice was hollow, defeated. We found out about the beach house. Did you? The private investigator saw the deed transfer. Lighthouse Drive, $2.8 million, cash purchase 6 weeks ago, right after you won the lottery. I poured myself coffee and walked onto my deck, where morning sun was already warming the teak furniture that had cost more than most people's cars. Congratulations on your detective work. Mom, please, can we just talk? Can we come over and see you? We, Brittany and me, we need to talk to you face to face. I looked out at my private beach, where waves were washing against sand that belonged to me now. I'm afraid that's not possible. Why not? Because, David, you'd have to be invited first. And people who think I'm too old and unattractive for family photographs don't get invited to my home. Mom, that was a mistake. No, David, a mistake is spilling coffee on someone's shirt. What happened at your wedding was a choice that revealed exactly how you and your wife view me. So what are you saying? That you're cutting us off completely? That you're going to sit in that house by yourself and pretend we don't exist?" I smiled, remembering Brittany's similar accusation about sitting alone in my apartment. They really couldn't imagine that a woman my age might have plans beyond serving their needs. "Actually, I won't be alone. I'm starting a foundation for elder financial abuse. Apparently, it's more common than I realized. Adult children manipulating their parents, treating them like personal banks, isolating them from other relationships so they're completely dependent on family approval. Silence on the other end. I'm also thinking about writing a book, about what it's like to win the lottery at 64, about the relationships that change when money enters the picture, about learning to set boundaries with adult children who've forgotten how to be grateful. Mom, but here's the truly interesting part. Truly, David, want to know what your wedding present was actually going to be?" "What do you mean?" I walked to my desk and pulled out the original gift, the white box with silver ribbon that I'd carried out of his wedding reception. Inside were the beach house deed and a cashier's check for $3 million, both made out to David and Brittany Williams. I had wrapped up the deed to this house and a check for $3 million. I was going to give you everything: the house, the money, the solution to all your financial problems. I was going to keep just enough for myself to live comfortably and give you the rest. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. "You're lying," he finally whispered. "The deed is still made out to both of you. The check is still signed, both sitting in a box wrapped in white paper with silver ribbon, exactly as they were the night you got married." "Mom, please." I was so excited to see your faces when you opened it. I imagined your joy, your gratitude, maybe even an apology from Brittany for some of her sharper comments over the years. I spent 2 weeks fantasizing about becoming the generous mother-in-law who solved all your problems with one incredible gift. "We can fix this." But instead, your wife decided I was too old and ugly for your precious photographs. And you, David, you stood there and let it happen. I didn't know. You didn't know because you weren't paying attention to your mother. You were paying attention to your social media photos and your reception timeline and everything except the woman who'd raised you and sacrificed for you and was about to give you everything she had. I could hear crying now, whether David or Brittany. I couldn't tell. So here's what's going to happen. I'm keeping the house, the money, and my dignity. You're keeping the crystal wine glasses and the memory of what you chose when you had to pick between treating me with respect and treating me like furniture. Mom, wait. And David, if you're ever ready to have a relationship with me that isn't based on what I can give you financially, you know where to find me. I'll be the old woman sitting on her private beach, living her best life. I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I walked onto my deck, looked out at the Atlantic Ocean that stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and smiled. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's getting everything. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.